Welcome to the June 10th, 2025 Planning and Zoning Commissioners meeting. Can we have roll call, please?
Ingalls.
Here.
Here.
McCracken.
Oh,
Here.
Fleming.
Here.
Ward.
Here.
Messina.
here.
Coppice.
Okay, can you join me in the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I need approval of March 26, 2025 joint workshop with the Historic Preservation Commission meeting.
I so approve.
Second.
I have, I have a motion by Commissioner Fleming, second by Ingalls. All in favor?
Aye.
I also need approval of minutes for the April 8th, 2025 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
I motion we approve the minutes from the April 8th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
I have a second. I have a, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And at this time, public comment, anything that isn't on our agenda, you can speak about? No? Okay. Staff comment?
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Just a few comments this evening. I have two staff members here that some of you may not have met. So we have Virginia Lustelot, our planning technician, is in the audience. She's here for the workshop item. She's very involved in reviewing plans, especially for accessory dwelling units, and so I thought it'd be good for her to be here. And then Barbara Barker, our new associate planner, is also here this evening. We did not receive any public hearing items for July, so looking at potentially doing another workshop on some either housekeeping codes or some other things like the twin homes, if we can work through that. So I'll keep you posted. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commission comments? Okay, moving on. Our first item is the applicant is Weeder Bear Land. Location is West Ramsey Road, south of Lopez Avenue, east of Player Drive. And it's a request for a one-year extension for an R34 special use permit to allow multifamily residential at 34 units per acre on a lot zone C17 that allows 17 units per acre. And Sean's going to give us an update.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners.
You're welcome.
So this evening, as alluded to, there is a request for an extension. It's not an actual hearing. This is an administrative item under other business, so I didn't prepare a full-blown presentation on this. So should be a fairly easy one to review, so we'll go through that right now. This is 3 parcels measuring a total of 3.116 acres in aggregate. It's located west of Ramsey Road, south of Lopez Avenue, east of Player Drive, zoned commercial. There's 3 parcels, but 2 of them are zoned CC, which is community commercial, and 1 of them zoned C17. So the decision point tonight is, should the Planning and Zoning Commission approve or deny the request of Weeder Bear Land LLC, represented by Stephen Goodmanson of Bernardo Wills Architects, for a 1-year extension of an approved special use permit, which was SP 224, that allowed for an R34 density increase in the C17 zoning district for a mixed-use development with multifamily units and commercial suites. So we met and presented this almost 1 year ago to the day. So on June 11th, the Planning and Zoning Commission of Coeur d'Alene held a public hearing on the above special use permit, and it was approved with conditions. There were 13 total conditions. They are also in your staff report. And it was approved unanimously by a 6-0 vote. So as part of an approval for a special use permit, code does allow, because they're valid for 1 year, and so they need to pull a permit and they need to do some work to vest themselves in there. But if that does not happen for whatever reason, code does allow for an extension. So I'll read a portion of this as cited code items from 1709-230, adherence to approved plans, the underlined portion states, however, such period of time may be extended by the Planning and Zoning Commission for 1 year without public notice upon written request filed at any time before the permit has expired and upon showing of unusual hardship not caused by the owner or applicant. And so I'll go back here to the discussion. So the applicant has submitted a letter dated May 8th of 2025 requesting the extension with a statement explaining the hardship they are encountering. The applicant indicates following the special use permit issuance that their architect has produced additional schematic designs with varied building layouts, unit sizes, mixes, and parking features, and a consulting firm completed a market study evaluating condominium and apartment concepts, and commercial brokers were consulted on commercial space designs. So what that study revealed is that high construction costs, particularly for a required parking study or parking structure, combined with current market rate apartment rents, present a risky and unfavorable financing option. So additionally, the market conditions for condominiums are less favorable than for apartments at the location. So as a result, the applicant requires additional time to address these financing and design challenges strategically. So if this is approved, the approval of the extension request would allow the applicant extra time to secure viable financing and refine the project design while ensuring compliance with all the permit conditions. The applicant's extension request letter is attached. And in the staff report, there's some site photos from the original staff report, as well as a site plan and a rendered elevation. So with that, that'll wrap up this request. There are 13 prior conditions of approval. They are towards the end of this request letter. And the Planning and Zoning Commission may, by motion, grant a 1-year extension of the approved special use permit, SP 224, to June 11th of 2026. If denied and the item expires, then the applicant must apply for another special use permit.
Do we have a limit on how many special use extensions we can do? Is there a hard stop?
Yes, this is it.
This is it. This will be it. I knew.
Good job.
Subdivisions can do that up to 5 times, but special use permits are
It's a different thing.
1 year, one year extension.
Thank you.
Sean, I got a question. As you read the applicant's letter, is there going to be different design on this project or they have to stay with the design that we approved prior to this with the special use permit? Because in their letter, the architect produced additional designs with different building layout options, unit sizes, mixes, and parking features. So how does that work with what we approved when we approved it a while ago? And are they planning to change the design?
So I am not privy to what they have been working on. They didn't provide any of that, but a special use permit, they do need to follow the site plan itself. The designs, that's a little more soft unless design review is triggered. So they do have a little bit of flexibility there, but by and far for the broadest perspective of this, it needs to meet what was approved as far as the site plan goes.
Okay, because in our package under the conceptual site plan rendered elevations, I remember that's what we saw the last time we heard this and approved it. So are they tied into this? That's what I'm asking, or they can change the layout because of what they said in their letter and
They
not
can
come back to us?
They can change the layout internally of the structure itself. So if, if their market study shows that, hey, maybe the suites need to be a little smaller or a little bigger, and then they are well within their right to do that.
Okay.
They can change, the number of units was set, but if they decided, hey, maybe 2 bedrooms would work better than 3 bedrooms or vice versa, they can do that as well. So they can change that internal structure of the building itself within the limits of the total number of units for density, but they do need to meet what was approved in the site plan.
Okay.
And we limited the height as well, did we not? Wasn't it 35 feet? Or was it?
Yeah, that is a limit that's in code.
That's code.
Yeah,
And
so
so
it's-
the parameters are set, the envelope's there, but they just have to decide whether they're apartments or whether they're condos or whatever the contents are, but they're restricted by the structure and the site plan.
Yeah, and so, rewinding the clock back to that evening, the CC portion, they decided that they would use that as the surface parking because there's, on the other side of Player Drive, there's homes there, and the idea was to allow those homes to have a continued view of the mountains on the other side, to a degree, obviously, but they put it down further on the slope and the C-17 further away from the residential homes to help with that view shed.
Okay.
Question. I'll preface my question that I'm not trying to make this hard. I think it was a good project. It received unanimous approval for, I think, good reasons. As you pointed out, I think the design was very thoughtful with the way it works with the neighborhood and whatnot. It's higher density, but it's in the right spot, right on our arterial, and, our comp plan encourages that. So the question, and, there's 13 conditions that, protect the city and actually improve a couple of quirks with the streets and the islands and turns and whatnot. So there's actually some, I think, benefit for me. I drive on Ramsey. It'll clean up a couple things maybe or whatnot. So I'm not making this hard. I'm supportive, but I just want maybe an academic moment here. Maybe the legal could jump in on this deal here. But, when I read in here, unusual hardship, I mean, not just a hardship, but if the bar is, it has to be an unusual hardship. That's harder than a normal hardship, And I draw the parallel to, with the variances, and we use this kind of a similar term in the variances, and they're almost unpassable because you can't achieve the hardship bar, So, I get it, that financing is tough right now. Interest rates are crazy. You got steel prices going up, yada, yada. I have sympathy. I think this is a good project. I want to approve it. But does the definition work against me in terms of my ability to be straight with the definition of unusual hardship and wanting to pass this?
Right. So I haven't seen a definition that defines hardship versus unusual hardship. So I turn that over to Randy. He's the wordsmith.
It is not defined anywhere as far as I know, and so the commission would have to decide what is unusual and what is usual. Hardships exist that could be usual in terms of, I don't know, difficulty in finding materials, things that are common, hardships that are experienced by various developers. So anything outside of that common could be considered unusual.
Pretty supportable then, in this case. Thank you.
Chairman, yeah. I remember this site, and it was suitable for multifamily development a year ago. I think we imposed some requirements about access because of the major roadways it's on. I don't remember we had a development agreement or not, but I don't think that really matters. It was a valid application back then and should be approved, and I feel it is still valid today. I'm not sure exactly what hardship means. I know for a variance, you have a piece of property and a river running through it or a tree, and you can't meet the setback when you build on it. That's a zoning hardship. I think this is really an issue of what would deter you from going forward. Financing is obviously one, but also market conditions. Maybe they don't need as many two bedrooms, maybe need three, and I can understand that. So I have no problem with this application at all.
And Sean, the conditions that were approved prior still run with the extension,
No
right?
change.
Correct.
No change. 45 feet.
All right. Anything else to Sean? Okay.
I'd
thanks.
motion we approve the 1 year,
Don't we
Oh.
let them speak?
it's not a public hearing.
Oh, it's not,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
It's an
Awesome.
administrative
I
item.
have a motion by
Motion to approve.
Commissioner English.
Second.
I have a second by Commissioner Ward. We have roll call?
Simple motion is fine.
Oh, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the extension is approved.
Cool.
Next on our agenda is a workshop. Possible code amendments by accessory use and impervious surface standards.
Say that fast.
Yeah.
All right, well, good evening again. So this is kind of a continuation of the discussion we had at the joint workshop with the Historic Preservation Commission and Planning and Zoning Commission in March. Those minutes are in your packet, and you approved those already. Instead of focusing on all of those items, staff kind of looked at the items that were maybe most pressing and easier to tackle. And so we're bringing forward this evening just the code amendments for discussion related to accessory structures, accessory uses, and impervious surfaces. So we'll kind of walk through those. So the focus, as I mentioned, is really on these two. The first is accessory use. So this is not only accessory dwelling units, but other accessory uses. The accessory dwelling unit code was amended in 2019 to allow increased heights if they were built over garages. So they're allowed to be 24 feet in height. And with that, we implemented a second-story step-back requirement that helped to kind of lessen the imposition of the taller structures in the rear yard on the neighboring properties. That has proved to be difficult for staff to administer that. It's been a challenge, and it's taken time and added more cost for applicants and owners to work with their design professionals to provide these very detailed elevation drawings with all the step-back measurements, and to kind of scale and verify that has been time-consuming for staff. So wanted to visit about that. Also, as we talked about at the joint workshop, accessory to. So kind of, are the accessory structures, are they accessory to in terms of kind of the sizing, massing, height, things like that. So those are some things we wanted to talk about. And then the impervious surface is something that with the ADU code, we implemented a pervious surface, so kind of flipping that. There's a requirement in the code with 30% of the site must be pervious so that it can, the waters, stormwater, snow can penetrate into the ground. So it's not covered with buildings and hardscapes. And we wanted to discuss if that's something that the commission would support, increasing the setbacks and increasing the requirement for the amount of pervious, so decreasing what can be an impervious surface. Right now, the setbacks and minimum setback requirements allow that 30% pervious surface to be achieved. And we have Chris Bosley here, our city engineer, this evening to help if you have questions about this, but there are ongoing issues with neighboring properties flooding out their neighbors with how close buildings are, with all of the other things with snow and stormwater and drainage and whatnot. So those are some things we wanted to talk to you about this evening. There was a code in place, and that did apply to residential lots. And we'll be looking at some of those standards this evening to see if we like any of those and want to bring them back. That was repealed in 2000. So we'll talk through those, starting with accessory uses. So I have on the slide some of the code language specific to accessory uses. So this first part is talking about what is accessory to. So what is accessory uses are appropriate, incidental, and subordinate to a principal use. So accessory uses shall be located on the same lot as a principal use except as otherwise provided in this section, and shall meet the criteria established in section 1706, 630 of this chapter. And then below that, there is the criteria. What is an accessory structure? So that defines it. A structure shall be considered to be accessory to and shall not be subject to the same site performance standards as the principal structure on the same lot if one or more of the following conditions applies.
Kill those lights.
Might keep the lights on a little bit for the commission.
Just a bit.
Thank you. Okay, so this talks about the structure is either detached and separated from the principal structure by 6 feet or more. It's attached to the principal structure by a breezeway, roof with intervening space of 5 feet or more, and the space is open on at least 2 sides. It is a private storage garage, it could be a fuel storage shed, etc. And then it defines what is not considered to be accessory. So we are looking at some possible code amendments related to height and setbacks, and then, as I mentioned, removing that second-story step back. So this is something wanted to get some input on, and I'll kind of walk through these, and then we have some series of slides with questions, so you don't have to answer all these on each of the slides. So we allow for accessory structures, so accessory dwelling units over garages and shops and other things, if they're in the building envelope for the principal structure. So if they're there, they can be up to 32 feet tall, even if the home is, say, 18 feet tall. So there's kind of no relationship to that.
What is the definition of the building envelope?
The building envelope, or those are the setbacks, so you have to meet your front, rear, and side setbacks for the principal structure. So typically it'd be 20 in the front. If you have an alley, it'd be 5 and 5 versus 5 and 10 if you don't have an alley, and then 25 feet in the rear yard.
Okay.
So if it's outside of that, then it can go taller. If it's within the rear yard is where we see a lot of accessory dwelling units, so within the 25 feet, and that has the 24 foot is the cap for an accessory dwelling unit over a garage. But there is a lot of homes are being built now with the attached ADU and garage where it's kind of just one continuous structure that goes into the rear yard. And so
And
they're
Hillary's,
taking advantage of that 32 foot tall within the principal envelope and then maybe tapering it if they're in the rear yard.
sorry, do we still have a limit on the square footage of a AD?
We do, yes.
What is that, like
800 square
800?
feet, I think, is the,
Something, I think it's 800 square feet. That can't be any larger than that.
right,
Okay, no matter if it's on a garage or a separate unit.
correct. If
Okay.
it's accessory dwelling, it is maxed at that. So this is a question if, a possible code amendment, so if it's attached to the principal structure, that it could be 32 feet tall within the principal building envelope. Otherwise, it would be limited to what's allowed in the code, which is the 24 feet if it's over a garage, or it would be 18 feet if it has a pitched roof, or 14 feet if it has a low sloped or flat roof. So that's one consideration. We'll keep walking through that. But
Right now, it's not required to be attached.
correct. Any detached structure, if it's in that principal building envelope, can be up to 32 feet tall.
So the change would be to require it to be attached.
Right, in order to achieve that. So that'd be, yes. So this is currently proposed for just ADUs for discussion only.
And Hillary, can we ask some more questions?
Sure.
As we go? Was there any discussion perhaps with staff to say any ADU units being built should stay within the height of the original house that's on that property? So, because I know that there's been
Piggyback.
big buildings on
Right.
properties being built. Has there any discussion been talked about?
We've talked about it internally. I know Historic Preservation Commission has talked about that. That's something that I think would be difficult sell at this point
Okay.
citywide. Maybe that's something for historic overlay areas if they wanted to opt into that. But I mean, that is certainly the commission has the option of making recommendations.
Okay.
And that's something that you could recommend. There are a lot of homes throughout the city that aren't that height, and with the increased interest in doing accessory dwelling units and allowing that extra 24, going up to 24 feet in height, it could
Okay.
change that for some people, but
All
yeah,
right,
good
thank you.
questions. Okay, here's another proposal. So setbacks for ADUs located in the rear 25 feet, to have it be 10 feet on both sides, including on street side yards. And so this is something that, looking at, if we remove that second story step back, and I'll show you some illustrations that could achieve a similar result by just increasing the setback. So this is,
Is that both side yards at 10?
would be.
Because
that's
right now
correct.
we have a 5 and a 10 deal.
Right.
Okay.
And then the rear yard, this is a proposal to consider keeping it 5 feet if you're next to an abutting rear alley. We have somewhere there's maybe a side alley, so this would be if there's a rear alley, to have 5 feet and then have 10 feet if there's no rear alley. And I can show you some examples as well, so you can kind of see what that looks like with the setback in relation to the step back line, the second story. And so here's the proposal to strike that entirely, the second story step back. The eaves still, this one does have, you can see the last bullet point, that still is kind of allowed in our code anyway. The eaves can encroach into the setback area, so that would still be allowed with the 2-foot encroachment of the eaves. So here is an illustration. This is an ADU that's over a garage. It meets all the step back and setback requirements. You can see on the screen, the 2-foot eaves are here. This has been achieved by 11-foot setbacks on the side yards. So, and if they kind of modified and didn't have such an overhang with the eaves, or, change the structure slightly, I think that could be achieved as well with the 10-foot, but this is showing you what that looks like. And this is off of an alley. And here that is zoomed in just so you can see. So these are the things that make it difficult when the designers are trying to do these elevations with the step backs and when staff is trying to verify all of the different things with a 45-degree angle and then figure out what's the eave and is that in that step back space or not, so.
So when these are being built, planners go out with great big ladders and they hang plumb bobs off there and all kinds of stuff to make sure these things are in compliance. I'm trying to get a flavor of
That's what
of
these are
why,
for
why it
now.
is difficult.
That's
I
what
mean,
this
it's
is
just,
for.
because lots slope and whatnot, and it's very difficult to really understand whether they comply. Is that true?
Yes, so planning doesn't do the measurements of the height and the setbacks, so the building department does that, but they do have a challenge when they have dirt piled up and there's all these things and they're trying to figure out where's the building wall and then they're trying to figure out where's that 45-degree and there's all these variations with the lot itself, so it is difficult for sure to have this other variable and then where's the eave and then they're trying to kind of shoot the laser line up to make sure, okay, is that in that same space and is it meeting the height at that location, the exact location where the step back should be? So those are our challenges right now.
Most of our lot sizes, if they're a typical lot in the city, run 50 feet wide.
Correct.
How many are exceptional in 40 feet? Do we have a few of those ringers?
We have a number of them, but not,
That's
the
restricted.
majority
You
are
come in 10,
certainly,
you come in 10, all you've got left is 20, and that's a two-car garage,
Right.
barely,
Right.
barely.
right.
So it's.
It's not a large number, or not a large percentage that are the
there's
40
few
foot side, but there are some, so that, those are gonna prove to be a little bit more challenging, but they
Yeah.
are already substandard lot sizes. The typical is the 50-foot frontage with the 5,500 square foot lot dimensions.
Right, this works well on a 50-foot lot.
And
It's a
maybe-
little titchier.
Maybe
on a
not every
40-foot.
lot should have an ADU.
Correct. A semi-wide? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
And Hillary, I remember when we did the ADU unit study and came up with this, the old plan, let's call it. Has it been difficult for staff to not approve ADU units when they come forward because of our current code, and have applicants found some loopholes to get around so they can build some of these larger structures that we see in town that have a garage and it towers over the neighborhood? Because I'm looking at this as protecting the neighborhoods. I'm not against the units or anything. I think that serves a purpose, but when they kind of interfere with the characteristics of a neighborhood, whether it's downtown or outside somewhere, that's my biggest concern. And regardless how we change our code or whatever, and what I've read, is it still going to be the same thing where the height is going to be interfering with the next door neighbor because they have windows on the second story looking down in someone's yard that used to be somewhat private and stuff. So I'm kind of trying to feel how staff has been interpreting what's been happening with our current code, and even if we change this, will this help somewhat, or do we have to be a little bit stricter on, like John says, maybe not every lot has ADU units available if the size doesn't require it, and if it does, then yeah, there's some restrictions for height and setbacks. I'm agreeing with setbacks. I'm all for even more setbacks. But my thing is just the existing neighborhoods, because I think they've been compromised recently.
To answer your question, I think for the most part, the code has worked well, other than the step back has been difficult to administer, as mentioned. There's always going to be people that push the limits and find the loopholes. What we're seeing more now, I think just with the cost of land and material prices and all of that, is people are trying to put more on their small properties. And so that's proved to be a challenge. I think that's made it more obvious for staff and commission members and community members to say, wait, maybe, now that we have a Historic Preservation Commission, they're hearing more about, well, that's changing the character of this historic neighborhood if there's all these outbuildings and maybe the scale and the number of units and the setbacks are different than what you see on a kind of a historical development pattern.
Right.
So I think that's what we've been seeing, and no matter what, right now, even just the principal dwelling can be 32 feet tall. So we do hear concern from people sometimes that someone's looking in my yard, but
Okay.
That's,
Well, I see you want
Probably be a reality.
You're asking whether we should put windows on those side blank walls. That's counter, I just went through this in Spokane, and we're doing an ADU on a historic property. And they took off the windows on the side, so it wouldn't look into the neighbor's
Right.
backyard. It was very deliberate removal of those windows. They can look one way, but they can't look over the neighbors.
Right.
So, something we should think about is adjacencies,
Right.
intrusion on the adjacencies.
So this image shows an example of a 9-foot rear yard setback from an alley that meets a second-story step back. And so this one, just based on kind of the roof line and all of that, it has to be at 9 feet to meet that. But this one shows that that can be met with that step back with a 3-foot 6-inch. So the 5-foot that's proposed next to an alley would still achieve that, depending on how people, design the structure. So some of them would be a little more imposing than others with kind of the roof line and how they've designed it, but that could be achieved. And this is an example of a site plan for that same one with that reduced rear yard. So it's 3 foot 6 inches at the rear. There's very limited space right now. It looks like there's 7 feet in between the principal dwelling unit and the garage ADU structure. So if at the rear yard, if you had an alley and we required that 10-foot, they could not fit that in that space. They'd have to either shrink it up or they wouldn't be able to do that project just because of how large the existing dwelling unit is.
And Hillary, can I ask you another question real
Sure.
quick? Are you finding that, that new or permits coming in are for new homes with ADU units, whether they're attached or separate, new construction because they knocked down an old house and you're seeing them want to build a new house, and then there's an ADU unit, whether it's attached or not there, or is it more an existing home and another unit in the back, whether it's over a garage or not? Are you seeing a
I've seen
pattern?
both. I don't know if staff thinks there's a predominance of one or the other, but Sean will speak to that.
Virginia is probably the best one to speak to this.
Okay,
I don't know
come on
how
up.
camera shy
Virginia.
she is, but
I warned her.
it's a wild mix. There is no one prevalent over another.
Right.
We see older homes that add an ADU. We see new construction that's attached or detached, trying to create a yard in between the two units, so there is some still privacy on that same lot. So it's really a crapshoot.
Okay. Okay.
Chairman? can I-
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Phil.
I've got a couple of questions. I want to ask one thing first. How do you distinguish a duplex from an ADU lot? I know there's a covenant required or something, or an agreement when someone chooses to build one of these, but what is the difference? I mean, it's still 2 units on a property.
Correct. So the underlying zoning, it depends on the underlying zoning. So in an R12, for example, you need 7,000 square feet for a duplex, 3,500 per
Right.
for your lot size. And many of the lots don't achieve that unless it's a lot and a half or 2 lots or something. So that's limited. But with an ADU, the main house can be whatever square foot is allowed within the 32 feet. But the ADU itself can only be 800 square feet or less.
I
So with a
understand.
duplex, there's no actual limit on the floor area size for either unit.
A couple other things. This isn't like a site plan review or a variance. I mean, this is technical stuff. And I'll be honest, on something like this and the next application, I'm going to defer to Hillary and you, Sean, and to Chris. You're the professionals who understand, you're on top of everything, and try to develop things that are consistent with good land use, American planning, whatever it happens to be, and I respect that. When I look at what we're doing here, there are different things I look at and I think, if I'm not a developer, an architect, and I read this code and I want to build an ADU, either part of a house or separate, I better know what the heck I'm doing because the second story has to set further back than the first floor, and the setbacks has to be this, and so on. And all that makes sense. And ADUs are the way to go. They're providing an option for more affordable housing or rentals, and I certainly do appreciate that too. But in looking through the actual code, there's one place that talks about you can have an 18-foot high garage, I think, which could be converted somehow to an ADU. Well, an 18-foot ceiling is like a warehouse. And to me, if I have a house and there's a 18-foot high garage next to me, probably not going to be real happy no matter how it's used. And I can give you an example right down on 2nd Street at Harrison. There's a single-family home in the corner. They built a garage next door, and it looks to be about 18 feet high. And I think, we kind of get overboard on what we need to do and how to regulate it. I don't have my glasses on. A couple other comments I wanted to go over here. In the code, you talk about the lot coverage and varying setbacks and how far away and protecting the property next door with windows or not having windows. And I kind of feel like there need to be setbacks. If it's going to be the house, we know what those are. If it's going to be a accessory dwelling unit independent of the house, then we need to have established setbacks. Someone looks at it and says, okay, I need to be 5 feet, 12 feet, 2 feet, whatever it is. And that's the envelope that you build in. And I feel like we've got so many things in the code right now, and the way it is now, I think the regions may be less so. It's very confusing to people. And I think it's something we probably want to encourage these ADUs, and I think the best way to do it is make it somewhat easier for people. Talk about windows. I'm pretty sure someplace in the fire code it talks about you can't have facing windows too close to another building, because if there's a fire in one, it can jump across through the windows to the other one, and there are limitations on that. And I don't know if those apply here or not. And I also think it's kind of easier just to say you want to have an accessory dwelling unit and it's not attached to the house. It needs to set back behind the principal building line of the main house. It could be 25 feet, it could be whatever is deemed appropriate, but it shouldn't be on line with the house, because that to me says it's a duplex, even though it's only 800 feet, but the house next door may only be 1,200 feet. And I just, I guess through it all, I would defer to county staff, whether it's on this or the next application with Chris, to what you professionally believe is the best thing to do. But just as a person sitting here, I think it could be very confusing to people. And if it's confusing, it defers people from doing it. And I think we want them to do it as much as we possibly can. That's all. Thank you.
Good points, Phil. I appreciate that.
Just don't try to build in space.
And, me being in the construction business, I understand the setbacks and stuff, and I agree with Phil. I think more clarity in what we want to change for an ADU unit should be set, so people know exactly what they can do and whatever the size lots are. And as John said, maybe not every lot is going to be able to do it. And, Lynn said about windows, I agree with that, and I'm sure the fire code might have something. I know you have to have big enough windows to get out of, but, in a bedroom, but the design should be so that it's not intrusive to the neighbors. And the height, definitely. Building, everyone nowadays is wanting, I wouldn't say larger garages, but larger storage units on their property, because they just have a lot of stuff in town, and they want to place it somewhere. I don't think garages are as important to some people as what I call storage units on properties and stuff. So, and I agree with Phil saying let staff make the changes and, talk to us about what we feel recommendations might be. But that's kind of my input on this. Go ahead, John.
I think we're kind of getting on a consensus here, and that staff this is, like Phil says, this is your call, you're looking for input. I think we're supportive of what it takes to do the job right. In your staff report, it says it's challenging to administer. Turn that around as you sell this to council and the community. If it's challenging for you, it's challenging for the property owners and the developers and the designers as well. Because what you're saying is there's not really good clarity of what can happen and what not. So I think you should go to a increased setback methodology rather than the step back thing. I think it should apply to all structures, whether they're a dwelling or not, whether it's just a barn dominium back there or whatever you call it, garage or whatnot. And so there you go.
I have a question on the second story step back. Is the ADU the only part that this is written into the code?
Correct.
So it doesn't, because I see how you're saying it's challenging to administer. So it's not, if they're looking at building a little shop or garage, detached, and then, as they're looking at the cost and maybe they're gonna, try to finance it or whatever, and they think, oh, maybe we'll add an ADU while we're at it, but then that changes the rules probably more than they were anticipating. I guess every time somebody submits the building permit and then gets corrections and has to go back, then everybody's reviewing it again, and that increases wait times and all that. Do you kind of have, so if this is the only place in the code that it kind of states that differently, I can see how that's confusing, but we're basically achieving the same thing by increasing the setbacks, is what I hear. But do we have kind of even if it's just like a rough guess, like 40% of these get turned back around, or we're back and forth on a lot, or is it pretty common? I'm just kind of curious, like how many people kind of struggle with this two-story step back?
I don't know if Virginia or Sean have the answers on that, but I do know, I think some of the more seasoned designers have done it, so they're used to it. But I think some people that are kind of coming in for the first time, they're working with a new architect, and there's a lot of back and forth trying to explain to them what needs to be submitted.
Right.
And then making sure that it meets those requirements, so it's definitely extra time.
Yeah.
And as you said, or I guess you asked the question and I'll answer it, that this is the only thing, so if they're building a shop within the principal building envelope that's 32 feet tall, that does not have a second story step back requirement. It's
Right.
only the ADU triggers that.
Right, and I can see how when people are kind of looking at doing improvements on their house, they, if you give a mouse cookie, you're like, oh, I'll do this, and then maybe we'll add a little apartment in there, and maybe we'll do this, but then not realizing it changes those setbacks. And really, 10 feet's still relatively close to the property line and probably would allow for a wider gate, and those kind of things. So, you can't really get that space back later, I guess, if you build in it. But it seems more clear and simple, just in consistency with other sections, to just have a setback. I think most people can understand the setback, and go walk their property and decide where that would be. So, yeah.
The only challenge comes in on a lot of our PUDs, people always ask for that 5 and 10. So we'd have to bridge over to PUDs and I think lay on the same rule, 10 feet, 10 feet. Because it seems like all the PUDs always ask for that 5 and 10.
And back to the point that maybe not every lot, you should
Deserves
see my
an
lot.
ADU.
There's no way you're gonna get an ADU on my lot. It's a little PUD, and I have a postage stamp for backyard. And you look at Meadow Ranches and those kind of deals, I think a lot of them are just gonna get boxed out because
They're just too small.
too small.
So, it's saying that, so when it comes through as a PUD, those would be kind of the same rules, and in order for us to grant some variance to that, we'd be granting a wider variance than we are now.
If they can fit
If
it in,
we
and
could
they
fit
make
it,
the,
and-
they make the setback.
And it likely might not fit, so,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Right, through the PUD process, they can always ask for that reduction
We
in
can
the
deny
setbacks,
it.
and I'll show you examples under the pervious surface where that happens frequently, and that is a challenge. That's also a challenge with driveway lengths and other things with the PUDs that
Right.
get deviated. But unless you said specifically in the code that ADU setbacks cannot be deviated through the PUD process, I would imagine you'll still get those requests.
We could ask, but then we'll kind of know what they're asking and
there's
how big of a difference it is. I think it's easier to administer, it's easier for people to understand. Nobody wants to get into the process and then have to rework it again or wait another year to get their stuff done because of the weather. So I think if we can make it clear and easy, that probably, and still achieve the same the same end goal, I think that's good, so.
Great. Mr. Chairman, I have some slides with some questions. If we could just, I know I've already
ahead.
received some good input, but just if we could work through these and
Sure, I'm sorry.
that
Go
would be
ahead.
great.
Still got,
Okay.
yeah.
So the first question, I believe your answer is yes, the Planning and Zoning Commission supports increasing setbacks and removing second-story step back.
Yes.
Should rear yards with rear alley be 10 feet for the ADUs over garages, or is the 5 feet more appropriate to provide a usable backyard? And I showed you that one example,
I'm for 10 feet.
I am too, those rear.
10 feet, even if
yeah,
it's adjacent to a rear alley.
Alleys are narrow.
Right. And then when you
Backing out.
add snow to it and people try to get in a garage, if it is a garage access.
That Ford F-150 just doesn't make it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's another question that came up. So our building official, Ted Lancey, wasn't able to be here this evening, but he asked if the setbacks increased to 10 feet, would decks and stairs be appropriate encroachments into that setback space? Because he anticipates there will be questions. So oftentimes the ADU has to have stairs to get to the exterior entrance versus internal.
As a side
Stairs.
entry.
Could either
Then
be
we
off
gotta
the
get into
rear
how big can,
side.
will the deck be, you know, does
So
the
the
deck get to go?
landing and the stairs itself would be 3 feet.
Right. But
3 feet.
my,
And the
And
eaves are
would be
2.
2 feet,
The
right?
eaves are 2 feet, so you're only going 1 foot over the eaves.
Well,
And that,
but-
you have to get into the unit. I mean, most of the time.
well, I guess if it's a second story entry into
An ADU on the second story.
yeah, you'd have to have some stairs on the outside, unless you determine, no, stairs on the outside, you have to have them on the inside. That's another discussion completely. But I guess,
If we increased the setbacks to 10, but allowed, a standard staircase with 3 feet, or a likely the same width of like a small
It's
balcony
actually
type.
3.6 to code.
3.6 to code, okay.
right, so the
So,
Doing 3 ADUs right now.
yeah, so I mean, I think the intent being to provide to the entrance of the upstairs unit, but not like a,
Yeah.
Big
a
deck.
10-foot deck off the side. I think if it's the width of a normal staircase to code, I think that seems reasonable.
So a 3-foot stair
3'6".
going upstairs with a 3-foot landing going into the residence for a second story ADU. As far as a first only ADU on ground level, normal entry with no decking outside, or how do you feel? Or
Not on the side yard.
well, I'm just saying if someone
Be in the
builds, if they
backyard.
do a 10 by, 10, if we do setbacks, like we just said, and it's a single ADU unit on ground level, do you just say, all right, you can put a
Well,
deck off of the entry into the place, or not? Or you,
well, it's solid surface. It's basically impervious surface.
okay.
You could, I mean, yeah.
Because that's why I'm going for clarity here.
Sidewalk
As
to
far as we
impervious
say
surface.
deck and stair,
Patio.
so how do you get it so that we don't run into this another 3 years down the
On
road?
grade,
And
it's- Yeah.
so,
I mean, if it's on grade, how are you gonna restrict that, except unless it fails to meet the pervious?
Correct, if we would address it through
You
that.
calculate that you could have a 10-foot wide piece of, a walkway to a 10-foot pad
Right.
into a slider or into an active door.
that's okay.
I
yeah.
think that's okay. As
Yeah,
long
and
as
I
they
think
meet
you would
their
need to
pervious.
allow for a ramp or a sidewalk or a staircase
Yeah.
to get into the unit on the outside.
Yeah, if you're doing a side entry, yeah.
I agree with you saying on second story, you need stairwells. And,
Well, I mean, you could put them inside, but it's likely less expensive to build them on the outside.
yeah, and then you're restricting the size inside of.
But we've
the-
increased the setbacks, so I think there's a little more space there
Okay.
with the
Did you
increase.
get that, Hillary?
Be increased, yes, I think I did.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, should all accessory structures be subject to the increased setback? So the single-story ones, you feel that those should also have the increased?
I think they should be consistent.
Okay.
Yes.
Keep it simple.
Okay.
Should ADUs within the principal building envelope be limited in height unless they are attached to the principal dwelling unit?
I agree with that. It
Yes.
should be limited in height.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Discussion
Agree.
further?
Yeah,
Agree.
Instead of the stack
Okay.
thing.
Should other accessory structures within the principal building envelope also be limited unless they're attached to the?
Yes.
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 All right, and should there be a requirement for windows on the ADU garage structure for walls that face another residential lot use or streets? And this was in response to taking away that step back so that maybe there's the blank walls, but you bring up good points that then there's gonna be more concerns with privacy, and the fire issue wouldn't be here because they would be outside of that concern
Fire concern.
for building code.
Well,
It's 10 feet away from the property lines.
I've
but-
voiced my opinion on windows.
Go for it.
So, commissioners,
Privacy.
no windows on abutting residents?
I would leave that off before me, but
I would leave it off too. I mean, I think sometimes there's just little upper windows that let in some light, you know, that aren't necessarily ingress, egress.
That's a
I-
good point.
I
maybe.
think there's ways to make that not harmful on the, I don't think all windows are like looking on the neighbor, so I don't know if I
You
would.
could even recess back and have an inset balcony with a window behind it. I mean, there's a
Yeah, I
lot
mean,
of play, so I
there's so
wouldn't
many
restrict
different
it.
options, so I just think restricting it's
Let's
gonna
not
add.
restrict it, yeah. Don't be Spokane.
So don't add it, don't require
Don't,
it, okay.
yeah, let's not restrict. They'll, let's see what they come up with.
Okay, so impervious surface, you ready to move on to this topic?
We're good?
Are we talking about pervious or impervious?
Well, exactly. So this is where we're gonna switch it up a little bit, because the
Yeah.
current code is
Gonna trick
pervious.
us.
The old code was impervious, and we wanna go back to impervious, because it's a little
I was
easier
reading this and
and more consistent with our current code. So we do currently have the definition on the screen here in our existing zoning code. So impervious surfaces means a hard surface area which either prevents or retards the entry of water into the soil, mantle, and or which causes water to run off the surface in greater quantities or at an increased rate of flow from the flow present under natural conditions prior to development. The code, as I mentioned, that was in place prior to 2000 when it was repealed, did have a more detailed definition, as you can see on the screen, that better defined what areas are considered impervious. So we would potentially want to add something like this to make it very clear when, if we're adding a new standard or just keeping the ADU standard and potentially increasing that, to make it very clear what is considered impervious, so that they know that the rest of it needs to be pervious.
Water runs off it, that's impervious.
Right, exactly, so. And then it has, in addition, other areas determined by the engineer to be impervious, so that is also built in. So this is a section of the zoning code that in the past zoning was a partnership with engineering and planning departments. So the prior code had these different percentages based on the zoning and the lots, which is really based on kind of the lot sizes you'd see. So it allowed 25% of the lot to be impervious for the R1 lot, so those are generally over 1 acre. 51% for the R3 and R5, 60% for the R8 and R12, 70% for R17 and MH8, and 75% for the R34. And then there was an increase not to exceed 85% if there was a parking lot that was probably by special use permit, that you can only do the parking lot in those zones with the special use permit, so it could increase that up to 85%, and in that case, there would have likely been a swale or some other things to account for the stormwater. So those were repealed at the time. In the staff report, it said that the requirements were no longer needed. They were getting some submittals for residential lots that weren't consistent with that, and they said that the regulations adopted in 1994 had the requirement for swales and were more comprehensive in detail. Therefore, this section of the code needed to be removed because it was less stringent. Fast forward to current times, staff doesn't feel that way. We don't have swale requirements for residential. We do for a large multifamily project and commercial, but not for single family. There is a requirement in the code, you have to keep your stormwater on your site, but that proves to be very challenging if we have very limited setbacks and lots of structures and hardscape surfaces. So we wanted to bring this forward as discussion, see if commission was supportive of changing those standards. Here's the language for the current ADU code. So it requires 30% pervious surface for all lots that have an ADU. So currently, this is the only section of the code that triggers it. So if someone is bringing in plans for an ADU, we would look at it. Otherwise, if they're bringing in plans for lots of shops, greenhouses, things like that, that trigger permits, we wouldn't look for it. So they could cover the large portion of their lot, and we wouldn't review it. So this is something we think would be beneficial to change.
So I have a question. I mean, this, I don't know, this whole, chart here of the pervious, impervious surface. Yeah. And then you look at Kootenai County. Theirs is just one sentence. On parcels that are minimum 5 acres in size, the following by right uses shall leave 65% of the parcel as open space free from structure. Hayden's very similar. On a parcel of land, whatever size the minimum, 65% of the area of the site shall be left in open space free from all structures. Not, I mean, and there's not like a graph and a chart, and you got to figure out how you fit and what things count, what things don't. I mean, I guess I see the idea of adding it back, and I think I kind of understand some of the complications that you guys have had with the amount of hardscape and that kind of thing. Is there a way to write it that's just really simple, or is the suggestion to add it back with a chart and different sizes, different percentages for different zoning? And I mean, is there somewhere in the middle of there, or is it kind of to go back to where it was before?
Recommendation at this point, but I mean, we're open. This is very preliminary discussion, so we want your input, and Chris may have different opinions in planning. I'm not sure. We kind of were batting around internally on like, okay, would you be okay if we increased it so that it would be 40% pervious, so that 60% impervious, so that's an increase, 10% improvement over what's there currently for ADUs. That would certainly simplify it, and then we could even increase that more for R1 if we wanted, because those are larger lots, or we could leave that alone. I think how they had it before, like I mentioned, the zoning was based on also kind of lot sizes and things, but that is a lot more complicated. To standardize it is much easier for staff to administer, but I don't know if Chris wants to speak to that.
Simpler, but then would there still be the opportunity for like an exception by special use, or
Increase.
something like that? But I kind of, it's like, well, we got rid of it, and then you look at how it was before, and it was just a little maybe overly complicated. And then you look at some of our neighboring communities, what they're doing, they kind of have it pretty simple to understand. Like, so much has to be free from structure. Okay, get that. This takes a lot more figuring out to figure out what you could do.
I'll show you on some of the examples kind of what we receive with the ADU plans and how they have to show the calculation. So it does certainly take a little bit of effort on their part and for staff to review it. But Chris anecdotally was looking at different codes and looked at McCall and said it was very complex formulas to try and figure it out. So we definitely want to err on the side of simpler for ourselves and for the
I was just
applicant.
curious, again, the first part of this workshop was kind of predicated, on the challenge to administer and whatnot. And I want to come in with an ADU permit, and I've had my house for 10 years and whatnot. When I come in with that application, what do I show? A site plan? And is it on me, here's my original house, and, do I come clean that I added this hardscape RV thing here, and then I added the basketball court later, and when they come in, do you just pull my original building file from 10 years ago that doesn't show those organic add-ons, you follow me, or is it incumbent on me to show an aerial photo off the county map or something so I come clean with this organic stuff that I've added and whatnot? This could get really complicated. So see, I put my RV deal over there, and I expanded my patio back there because I like big parties, and what do you actually look at when I come in for that ADU permit? What do you see?
So this is what we require with the ADU submittal. So they have to provide this, so they show the exhibit, and then they have to do this calculation of lot coverage for us to review. But we did talk about exactly what you said. I mean, not everybody's honest, right?
You would expect me to show that organic ad, yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah,
We
good.
would expect you to, but we know not everybody complies.
But if later there's a problem and the neighbor is
Correct,
complaining
and we'll
because
say
I'm
this-
shedding water next door
Right.
and whatnot, you'd have,
Then we have
say,
code
hey, you're not
enforcement, right?
X%, you're way over.
Correct.
Hillary, I need to go back a step. I know we're talking about impervious surface requirements right now.
Correct.
There's one at the end of other possible ways to address stormwater and snow runoff. Is that coming up, or did we kind of
It's good to pass.
That will be
pass that one?
a question. So that was talking about kind of like snow breaks and French drains and things like that.
Yeah, because impossible runoff onto neighbor properties are required. Snow breaks on metal roofs and limit use of metal to certain pitches. Require gutters on all permitted structures and/or French drains. Is this a feasible or realistic? So I don't know if we had that discussion on that, or what's the feeling
Do
on
you
that?
have some input on the snow breaks? So Ted Lancey, building official, said that they are going to start on their end when they get permits in. They're gonna start looking at anything that's within 5 feet of a property line. If it has a metal roof, they'll be requiring the snow break, so that could help. Doesn't entirely,
Snow breaks,
Alleviate.
B-R-E-A-K-S,
But-
not breaks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but my question is, for any new units, ADUs and stuff, why wouldn't they just match the existing roof that's on the existing house, let's say? If it's comp roof, why wouldn't we do comp instead of having metal on a new unit? And that's something I'm looking for
Slope,
discussion.
4 and 12, you know
Okay.
that. I mean, metal goes on 4 and 12.
Okay.
Asphalt doesn't go on 4 and 12.
Okay,
So
so
it has to do with your slope.
the pitch, but the design factor is, we didn't talk about any type of pictures or anything like that, so,
I don't think we can do that.
no.
We shouldn't weigh in on that, should we?
Okay.
I don't think so.
Or they're doing
Let
a
the
little
designers
full barn shop.
design.
Yeah, or.
That'd be
Good question.
overstepping.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
do,
hope
if
so.
could,
Hope
please.
not.
Hillary, I understand, the whole idea of zoning is you have building and green area and driveways and maybe a swimming pool, a tennis court, whatever you want. But what I read here, the concern isn't all of those. The concern really is water runoff.
Right.
Where's that drainage going to go? It's going to go out in the street on the neighbor's property. And I don't know, but I want to ask, is there a provision in the city ordinance anywhere that says you must retain your own water on your property?
there is.
And if that's there, then other than we want to move stuff around as to where it can drain, I think it's really simply a matter of, you can't do it if it's going out in the street, if it's going next door, and we'll shut it down if that's the case. But I'm just not sure where this is going. The whole
Percentage.
presentation, if the idea is to control that water runoff, then if we have a law to do it, I'm not sure how much this is necessary. I could see maybe you want to change lot coverage. Say you have to have 40% lot coverage, but if you want to go closer, then you have to show you can contain the water. But other than that, anything you're building to comply with the code, and the water retention is a requirement by law. So I'm not sure how many regulations we need to put out there to, I don't mean this the way it sounds. I'm really trying to make it simpler here, but it isn't working that way. But I just think we could kind of cut it back. You can't do it, period. And then, deal with the plan, what's allowed from there.
The challenge is enforcing it if we don't change something, so I think talking about changing the setbacks for the ADUs and accessory structures can help. But also, if you don't have enough green space for the water to penetrate, most people aren't going and doing elaborate drain systems on their lots, and then we have to enforce it on the tail end, where it's running into the street and the alley and onto the neighboring property, and so that's where the lot coverage and pervious surface is what we're looking at, and certainly
Maybe
if
by
we
addressing.
simplify it.
For their purposes is, there's a standard of retaining your water on your property, and then there's checklist of boxes. Do you have French drains? No. How are you accommodating that runoff? Have you got swales? How, where is this water occurring, and is there a metal roof that's shedding all that snow right on your neighbor's fence? I think there almost has to be a tick box so that they can ask the questions and put that designer or that owner on the spot to answer how they're going to deal with that water. Because everybody knows they're supposed to deal with it, but if they can get away without it, they will. And I think that, they need clout to have a tick box, and the builder knows they're supposed to have a French drain, or they know they're supposed to have, snow breaks, or know they're supposed to contain their own water. and prevent it from sliding over to their neighbors. So I think that to facilitate their ease is, have you met these? And I get it from Spokane. You have to tick all these damn boxes, and that you've addressed every single one of their needs. I mean, they want to know even who is the manufacturer and what's the heat loss and the heat gain. I'm like, I'm not the builder. How do I know? So, it's trying to make their job easier and understand that. So I don't think that we're overstepping. I think that we need to give them the guidance to put the builder, homeowner on the spot in order to address those issues. Make sure that they're aware of it. Some of them aren't aware. They go, oh, I've got a shed roof, I got a metal roof, that's cool, but I don't think about the 10 feet of snow that all of a sudden comes down and ruins their fence.
Well, I think most of it sounds like most of it, when it becomes an issue, is when it gets addressed.
That's the problem.
I
It's
mean,
too late.
because they're
It's too
maybe
late.
not super, but increasing the setbacks would help with some pretty common ones. And then I guess just because we're just trying to simplify even the ADU second story one, just if there's a way that with the city engineer, if we were to calculate like an estimate of if everybody built to the limit on these, could we even possibly handle that kind of stormwater if it was going in the streets, or, decide a number that's a threshold that's reasonable and just make it really simple. And then if somebody wants an exception, then maybe there's a process for that. And in that exception, you're proving out where your water's going and what type of drainage you're doing in order to get an exception. But if the threshold is something that should accomplish most water runoff on an average lot, kind of enough pervious space, then when somebody ticks over that amount of coverage, then they're kind of given prove out what you're doing with it then, and then it's approved at that point. I mean, I don't know. I feel like just trying to make sure we're not making more work to approve it with a big grid and a lot of things going on.
Well, I know that, again, from the building side experience, you have to retain, as Lynn said, your water on your
your job.
properties. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just the
That's your
bottom line for a
responsibility.
permit.
And that's not
And to get a
changing,
CO. And whether it's, a swell, which a lot of properties can't have because they're a small lot, or,
And strain.
some other way of retaining your water, just let it run into a gutter and down spout and then let it go on grass. That's fine and dandy, provided it doesn't build up so much that it goes over to your neighbor's property. Even though we are increasing the setbacks, that's great, but, when you have your downspout and you got your little kick out, you might be a foot out or sometimes even 2 feet out, just so it can get into that grass area so it isn't running right on concrete. So, I'm not sure how to really approach this with all the percentage and all the terminology, because yes, it's gonna get somewhat confusing. I kinda like Lynn's approach, saying, hey, you gotta retain your water. Here's a checklist. I'm not sure that's the way to go
How are you
either.
doing it? How do you plan to address it?
Yeah,
I
what
mean,
do you,
that's a natural question.
Yeah, because
I would think.
most, as you say, most builders are aware that
Yeah,
you got to
they
retain
know.
your water, whether homeowners know it or not. But in that building process, I'm sure that discussion's got to come up with the homeowner, saying, we have to retain the water on your property, and whether it's, this way or that way, we just have to do that. So,
I think John has.
yeah, I hear what Phil's saying. And I don't know how to really address it. Maybe, John, you have
Oh,
an
I
answer.
just, the real world on this one is really, really hard. I mean, if the standard is 30% and we bump it to 40 or pick a number, whatever that number is, it does, let's say we move it to 40, 45, pick a number. That's not going to guarantee, if the standard is all the water that lands here stays here. And, okay, so I come in with my perfect drawing that shows I have
Swale,
45% grass,
Right.
and so I got 45% impervious. My lot slopes a little like this. It's the dead of winter when my grass is hard as a rock, and you tell me that the water's going to stay there. I mean, in the real world, what we're saying here is by having a number of 30 or 40 or whatever is going to be, I guess, presumptive that saves the day. You know, I think when you jump, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong back there, to, you know, if I was building a strip mall deal, I have to come in and really prove that the water that lands here, it stays here. And then with showing that I've got, you know, deep swale here and 6 dry wells and whatnot, I don't have to have 40% because I am, and I've got just the right, you know, your ingresses and egresses, you know, do that hump thing that dams the water in there so it doesn't run. You know, on a commercial lot, you know, you have to come in and pass the test. I guess what we're saying here is that just come in with your 40% thing and we'll just assume it's going to work. It may or may not. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying it's hard out in the real world.
Mr. Chairman, would it help if we bring Chris up and have him kind of speak to some of the ideas?
Yeah, maybe some of the
Well, and
I'm
what
not
you're
sure.
seeing on the
Real-
front line.
Checklist.
real life
Like what
horror
you're seeing on the
stories or
front lines.
whatever.
Checklist,
Yeah.
something the engineering could review with the permits, or, you know, I don't know. I guess that's, we just need to figure out
Well, let's see
logistically, like
what's-
what you support and how it would work for staff.
Yeah, I'm thinking that what you're hearing from us is whatever staff feels is going to be less heartache for you guys to, whether the enforcement of it is a different scenario completely, but whatever helps staff so that we're not, you know, having a lot of, or you guys are having a lot of discussions of what should we do. So-
Maybe first, correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, if this is a commercial project, the standard is a lot higher to prove all those things to show that the water stays there.
Yeah, you have to show us calculations and all of that. And then there's testing usually that occurs with the swales, infiltration testing and all that after the fact to prove that their design was correct in the first place.
And just to fix this from the residential basis, we just adopt the same standard, and then we'll be run out of town because
Right.
it's too hard, you know. So what's the balance, you know?
So I don't know the magic number of what should be pervious area, but I think any increase is good. I mean, the increase in setbacks that you're looking at now, that's automatically going to help because now they won't be able to fill in as much area because they've got a 10-foot side yard that they have to maintain. What happens a lot of times is, especially on these PUDs, very small lots, people have their house and their garage, and then they come in after the fact, after they've moved in, and then they don't want to maintain 100 square feet of lawn anymore, so they put in pavers or concrete or whatever. And then the neighbor is calling because all that water's running into their yard, and then I have to tell them that we don't get involved with civil disputes between two neighbors, and then they say, why did you approve it in the first place? And we're like, well, we didn't approve it that way, you know? So it's, I don't know, it's difficult. I think the more pervious area we can maintain is better for everybody. And not all soils are the same either. I mean, we've got some areas of town that have historically just been swamps in the backyard because they've got such high clay content in the soils. And then other areas where they can take 100 inches per hour in their gravelly soils. So it's a wide range. So it's hard for a one size fits all. As far as the county's version or their rule, they have 5 acre lots.
Right.
That's pretty easy to put a number on a 5 acre lot. When you're getting down to a 0.08 acre lot, that's a little different because there's a lot of competition for space in there.
But Hayden has a smaller minimum lot size too. They have the same
Yes.
percentage.
Yeah, and I was telling Hillary today about the McCall example because I was trying to find another example. I'm like, okay, well, I looked at Seattle. Like, what does Seattle have? It rains a lot there. And AI tells me they don't have a requirement, but I don't believe AI. So I was digging deeper, and people are like, don't worry about it. Just put in what you want. Ask for forgiveness later. But then I looked at McCall's example, and it has tables to select what material type you have. And then it has a coefficient for permeability on that. And then they have equations depending on your zoning. And you take each of those factors and those coefficients and you put them into the equation depending on your zone that you're in. And I'm like, we're not going there at all.
Don't build a McCall.
No.
That's the motto. Yeah.
Back to getting run out of town.
Right, exactly.
So I hear what you're saying, Chris, you know,
Oh, yeah,
With a
and
permit, like, could you guys do that, or is that too much?
uh,
It's always a challenge getting more paperwork submitted with permits.
yeah, I think checklist is something that we could review. I think it's something that a lot of property owners might complain about, because it's another step for them. And maybe it just needs to be if they exceed a certain threshold or a certain lot size. Maybe 1 acre lot doesn't need to have all these calculations, but a 0.0 acre lot does because the competition for space there. And I don't know where that line is drawn, but like I said, any improvement we make will be an improvement as far as setbacks and impervious area goes, because it is something we commonly deal with property owners complaining about water coming off of their neighbor's property onto their property. In your packet, there were a couple aerial photos showing,
Pervious.
showing some different houses and PUDs and such, and how much area they take up. That one, for example, was one that I dealt with. I won't name the developer, but where I was getting complaints from the neighbors of stormwater runoff onto their property. So when the next development came along, I required a stormwater management plan, which wasn't just for the roads they put in, but for the yards themselves. And so what they ended up doing is taking all of the roof gutters and the downspouts going into a pipe system that went to dry wells, so they could dispose of all their stormwater from their roofs without flooding their yards. And that, I haven't got any complaints from that neighborhood yet, so, and it's been there a few years.
So I think with the PUD process, we're hoping that you're gonna do that, right? Like, and alert us of the things that you've seen that didn't work or did work. And, I mean, maybe it's a combination of a reasonable threshold that should be achievable, and then if you are above that, then there's a checklist that you have to do. I mean, just something I feel like that's relatively, not a lot of formulas and
Right.
extra math, but something that I think the average person can understand. Okay, I get that I'm going to push the limit on this, but if I can prove it out, then that might be just fine. But it would be similar to a PUD in that we're asking them to prove it out if they're above a certain threshold. So I guess more from you guys what the threshold should be, of what you feel comfortable that for the average lot with the average soil with, would be kind of reasonable. And if it's, 40% from 35, maybe that makes sense.
Nothing.
But yeah, maybe the second step doesn't apply with ones that are on an acre, that it just isn't worth your time to review because they don't have it all hardscaped,
Yeah, and we can look at different zoning and different lot sizes and see where the frequency of problems might occur more, and try to draw a line in there somewhere so that not everybody is required to go to the extra steps. Because I'm sure that we'll get a lot of complaints about comparing us to Spokane or something like that because of our rules.
But maybe there's like a level 1 and level 2 or something fairly reasonable, that can be still an improvement on what we have. And if that doesn't work, or we could come back. But I think from other ones that are hard to administer, I don't think the goal would be to make it harder to administer necessarily on the homeowner side or your side. So
I
Go
wanna
ahead, John.
Ask
Sorry.
a question again. The whole premise, what lands here stays here. I get that. In these little PUD deals, if you look at Meadow Ranch, you could look at Park Rose where I live or whatnot. And there's no way there's 40% pervious on my lot or Meadow Ranch. None of those meet it. But correct me if I'm wrong, that when PUDs come forward, what we're really saying is the water that lands on the PUD stays on the PUD. Since it's all private in there, the roads, the track, you have tracks to deal with in there. And as long as the water as the PUD as a whole stays there and doesn't run off to the next development, we're okay, correct? I mean, each individual lot, they don't pass by a lot basis, but as a PUD community like Meadow Ranch, it stays there. Is that correct?
That's probably true, but it still causes some private property disputes between.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. You know,
Yeah.
where
And I should add also that our drainage utility collects stormwater fees based on where you live and whether you're commercial or residential. And with residential, there's an assumption that at least the driveway is going to drain into the street also. So, I mean, it's not like all water stays on the lot. And then with commercial, we try to coerce them into keeping all water on site. Sometimes it's an existing site that the water runs off and they pay an increased drainage fee based on their square footage. So if your entire driveway or your entire parking lot, building and everything drains into the city right of way, you're going to pay for every square foot of impervious area that you have on your property. And then it goes into our drainage fee to help combat stormwater.
Chris, what are you seeing in some of the developments that have been approved where we did reduce setbacks in between whatever the buildings are? You know, instead of 10 and 10 on side yards, we did 5 and 5. And most of the roofs are sloping into that 5 and 5, and they have their gutters, which are fine. They have their downspouts, which are fine, but they don't have any piping from that downspout out to wherever it might have gone. Is those complaints that might come into the city that, all right, I'm draining into my 5 feet, but it's a good storm, it's going over to my neighbor's 5 feet?
Well, and that's another interesting conundrum, is that our building department tries to maintain that the ground sheds away from buildings to protect the foundation, which is natural. 5 feet of drainage away from it. If you've only got a 5-foot setback, you're draining to the property line.
Right.
So by increasing that, it's definitely going to help to have some place for that stormwater to go. The example you speak of is up there on the screen where all those roofs are almost touching each other. There's a bunch down in Bella Reeve like that. And I believe in this case was one of the homeowners who called complaining about the neighbor's snow falling on their heat pump and their gas meter and all that kind of stuff, which raises some eyebrows.
Right. So we're learning.
Yes.
And in a perfect world, if you didn't have to ask us for some recommendations, what would you, staff, come up with to help make it easier and not have so many calls or problems? So what would you, I know we have a whole bunch of recommendations, but guide us a little bit for what would you like us to give a recommendation to?
Perfect world.
So tell us
40%
if you can.
and apply it to all
if you want.
residential?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, any improvement is definitely heading in the right direction. And
Okay.
with the setback increases, that's going to help. It's going
Right.
to change that 35% to something higher, maybe 40% anyway, but I don't know what the answer is, but
Yeah, like John said, there's no magic number.
Right,
It's going to be
right.
what it's going to be until we
and
have
who knows what
our
people
next
do
meeting
after
like
we
this.
leave too. Once the final inspection is done, they get their certificate of
Yes.
occupancy, and then they bring in the contractors and the landscapers to
They put
change their
sheds
entire
and
property.
pads and fire pits, and, which is, normal everyday living.
But if
Yeah.
you start from 30 and add those things versus
Right.
start from 40 and add those things.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just a workshop, so I mean, I think if you, with that in mind, when it comes
Sheds and
back,
stuff.
kind of maybe think about it a little bit on
Yeah.
what seems reasonable. I think all of us are kind of open to that professional recommendation, but also want to be, easy to administer.
Not McCall.
No.
No, yeah. So,
When did we drop the prior code, the 25% impervious for R1, 51%, why 51? R3 to R5? and 60.
was
When was
back in,
that, when did that disappear?
Look at this one.
Sorry, I missed your question.
When did the prior code that had the
1,000.
percentiles, okay. 51% is just a stupid number, no matter what you do. That's the kind of stuff you just go,
Right.
what?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, what you've provided is helpful for us, so I think we
Yeah.
can kind of go research a little bit more and come back with something.
Well, and then chat with the people involved in all the approvals, because, you know, does it make sense in that process too, and how you'd administer it?
I think they, do you know that they're making pervious asphalt now? Have you seen that?
Yes,
a whole new
when I
thing.
was living in Massachusetts, I got to
Pervious.
experience some of it. We've looked at it, implementing it in certain projects, but it requires kind of vacuuming out all the silts from the pore spaces in the asphalt to keep it functioning over time.
And I wonder how it is, in Massachusetts, they use it, so
Yeah.
even though they have tough winters, so I'm surprised.
It was in a parking lot at, I believe Lexington City Hall, so.
So from this, currently, how are you dealing with that, other than getting the complaints from the adjacencies currently? When you're reviewing it, how do you read that lot and coverage and impervious, pervious right now? What clout do you have? Do you have any?
Well, maybe the only clout that I have is that I can require a stormwater management plan. And that I've only been implementing on these PUDs or large subdivisions or whatever when they're trying to pack a bunch of stuff in there.
Where you can see there's no pervious
Right,
surfaces.
right.
Like
If it's a traditional subdivision with larger lots, there's really no concern. They're doing their calculations for road drainage, which is what we need them to do, but the lots themselves have so much grass that it's really not a concern, but things like that are a concern.
So it's really a common sense, I gotta raise a flag, this is not gonna be good. That's really what you're working on right now. This doesn't look,
Right, the
this
sniff
doesn't look
test,
like
yeah.
positive outcomes.
Yeah,
And you're not currently requiring a plan on an individual lot.
correct.
But if you had a threshold, you could.
Right, yes, yes.
Okay.
Any more questions to Chris? Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Appreciate it. Okay, so where are we, Hillary?
Finito?
We have some, I guess, code amendment considerations to look at.
Yeah.
So this one, I think you kind of already gave us a little bit of latitude to kind of talk through
Yeah.
these, so I don't know if we need to work through these questions on the
Okay.
pervious surfaces,
The percentage.
impervious.
But
the
how
yeah.
about, should it be required for all, and this is for discussion with us up here, should it be required for all structures on all single-family residential lots as a whole paragraph? Or just ADUs, or what's the feel on that?
I mean, I think they all add to that percentage. So I think to be consistent, you should require it on all structures. I mean,
Okay, that sounds good for me.
Okay. And then this one, are you comfortable with us switching it from the pervious to impervious? Okay, great. And then we already talked about percentages, and then I think this last question is a little bit different for townhouse and multifamily development anyway, but wondering about an increased impervious surface coverage for that.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to what Chris might have been saying about structures being so close to each other. and
yeah, I mean, I think
Between,
maybe you guys take that back and decide if that feels like the right amount
Yeah,
with the increased setbacks is,
right.
you know, and kind of, you know, maybe an example or two of what square footage you could actually even do. If you make it too high, then you won't be able to build something. So,
Jay.
okay.
That's it. Thank you. Appreciate your input.
All right, thanks,
Unless you
Hillary.
have anything
Appreciate it.
further.
All the hard work. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Okay,
I think that's it.
that being it, I would call for a motion to adjourn.
second.
Who did the first?
You did the first.
No, I'll do the first. I motion
All
to
right,
adjourn.
second.
we have McCracken doing the first, and Fleming doing the second. All in favor?
Aye. Coeur d'Alene this
opposed?
weekend, folks. Be there.
We're adjourned.
Happy Father's Day.
There's a lot going on this weekend.
There's a ton.